Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for a brand new Skylanders video here on the channel. As we all know, Activision released a new Skylanders game every single year and they maximised profitability within 1 year time spans of each game releasing one after another by selling different versions of the same character year in, year out. This does mean that these alternate versions of the same character were an incredibly efficient means of maximising profit, as the developers didn't really need to put in all that much effort to create the character, as they weren't designing the character from the ground up each time. They could just take what they had with the original Skylander and build upon it, or even just give them a new coat of paint and call it a variant. Slap some gold and black on there and call it a day, job done, now it's time to watch the money come raking in already. However, that begs the question, what if we only got one version of every single Skylander? Which version would I choose to keep? And just like halving the Skylanders cast, determining which version of each Skylander to keep, it is no easy task, because so many characters have so many great versions of themselves to choose from. As for the rules, a revamp from Superchargers counts as a different version of the same character, so if I choose a version with the original moveset, I can't then have a version of the Superchargers revamp as well. However, one version of their respective vehicle can remain, so we will still have at least 2 vehicles per element for Superchargers, with the light and dark elements being the only exception to that rule. Everything from the version I choose for a character also remains unchanged, meaning any WoW power abilities or backwards compatibility that version of character possesses remains intact. It's simple as that, really. We'll go through all 6 games in order of release, which means we get to start with Spyro's adventure. So now the question at hand becomes, which version of the flagship character from this game do I choose? I'm obviously talking about Spyro here, as his name is quite literally in the game's title. It would be optimal to choose his latest most repos, because based on the rules I stated at the beginning of the video, a Series 3 would have their Series 2 WoW power in their game of origin, and they even work all the way back to Spyro's adventure in this case. This means I have a choice between Mega Ram Spyro or Dark Mega Ram Spyro. We'll save the dark variants for other character versions. The purple and yellow is just too iconic for such a gaming icon like Spyro. The pose with his horns is also the best Spyro pose, and you also get to access his Series 3 WoW power from Swap Force onwards, and his Series 2 WoW power for Giants. Plus he'd still be playable all the way back in Spyro's adventure, as we've already established, so you can play as the character whose name is quite literally in the game's title. I would sacrifice the overpowered nature of Spyro's elite form for both the incredible pose and the in-game WoW power capabilities. That leads us on to Double Trouble. Choosing which version of this character to keep was easy. It would obviously be his royal variant, because the colours are unique and visually eye-pleasing due to the sharp and vibrant colour contrast. This version also has his split beam WoW power as its variant of Series 2 Double Trouble, even though it has the Series 1 pose, as this would lead to some really overpowered gameplay when the split beam is combined with a doubles path, because the split beam will split and defeat multiple enemies at once, forming multiple doubles all at once that maximise damage upon impact with enemies. It's one hell of a potent combo indeed. But as for my least favourite Skylander of all time, Wrecking Ball, at least with just his metallic Series 2 version, he can be a little less awful. Sure, his awesome purple metallic colours won't show in game, but you'll still get his Disco Ball WoW power and backwards compatibility, so he can suck in both Spyro's Adventure and Giants. This is simply the cooler looking version of Series 2 Wrecking Ball, which you definitely want over the original, so you can have both the WoW power and the better pose. Finally, for the magic element, I'd take the overpowered Voodoo and make him even more overpowered with the utilisation of his Eon's Elite. He may not get his power buff until Superchargers, but even baseline Voodoo deals a ton of damage, and in the previous games where he's backwards compatible, you still have the much cooler pose to look at when placing Voodoo upon the Portal of Power. But moving along to the Earth element, despite how cool Bash's blue chase variant is, I'd rather have the Series 2 version, since his WoW power adds a lot of fluidity into Bash's movement style, making him even more fast paced and fun to play as. So I'm not willing to sacrifice that awesome WoW power ability just for a cool blue looking figurine. Plus for Series 2 pose is also much better, since Bash now has his Triceratops headgear. As for Dynarang, I wouldn't take up the same route as Voodoo because I'd rather keep his silver chase variant lying around. The Eon's Elite doesn't have any WoW power, so I wouldn't be losing any special abilities. The only difference here is that Dynarang wouldn't become an overpowered elite when we surpass Superchargers, but Dynarang is overpowered enough already without the buff, so I'd sacrifice his elite form for the cool looking silver variant even if it doesn't show up in game. For Prison Break, it was actually the toughest decision to make for the entire video. I'm so incredibly fond of the golden snow-flocked Lightcore version because it looks so good, and at its core, it's still Lightcore Prison Break, whose Lightcore ability is notorious in this franchise. How do you strip away something so iconic to this franchise? But then you lose the WoW power abilities which make Prison Break even better. Plus, on the Series 3 version, the red crystals serve as a nice colour contrast to all of the brown colours that you find on Prison Break's body. So after going back and forth for literal hours, I'm choosing the Hyper Beam Prison Break version to keep. Sure, we lose the iconic Light Core as well as the legendary Chase variant design, but this way we have access to all of Prison Break's WoW powers, which make his gameplay filled with even more depth, and it makes him all the more overpowered in-game as a result. Enemies therefore don't stand a chance against Prison Break's might. And finally for the Earth element, I'd keep Knockout Terrafin, since the gauntlets look really cool on him and we'd have access to every single one of his WoW power abilities, which makes his gameplay even better. I don't mind having to sacrifice the Eon's Elite for it. Moving along to Zap, I'd keep his Series 2 version for the same reasons as I would Series 2 Bash, because the WoW power adds even more fluidity to Zap's movement to make him much more fast-paced and overpowered in combat. Plus, the Glow in the Dark version doesn't even look that good anyway, so we're not exactly missing out on much by getting rid of it. Slam Bam was yet another difficult choice. His legendary version is ugly, since I personally don't think the colour scheme fits his design very well, so the toss-up was between the Elite version and the Series 2 version. I don't think Slam Bam's Series 2 WoW power is particularly impressive, but the Elite, on the other hand, is not only incredibly overpowered past Superchargers, but it also has a much cooler pose. The goggles, the sparkly sled is all so damn cool looking. Next up we have Whamshell. The choice here was between his translucent crystal version and his light core version. Neither version have the advantage of possessing abilities that the other one does not, because the light cores don't get WoW power abilities the same as elites don't get WoW power abilities either. I decided to go with the light core version in the end, because despite the figurine coming from Swap Force, that light core effect on the figurine still works no matter which game you're playing, so just like Elite Voodoo, you get a cooler figurine atop the portal whenever you're playing as this character, you could go as far to say. And as cherry on top of the cake, the light core effect is really good looking and it suits the character very well, so I'd rather not give it up so easily, which is why this is the one version of the character I choose to keep. Plus, how could I possibly say no to a face like that? But finally for water there is Gilgren, another tough decision because there are so many versions for this character to choose from. He's the only character to make it all the way up to a Series 4 in Trap Team. Actually, that Series 4 is the version of Gilgren I choose to keep. The pose is awesome because he has that massive sea creature, which would make his toy stand out for its uniqueness amongst the rest of the Skylanders crowd. And we'd have 3 different WoW power abilities based on which game you were playing. You'd have the Series 2 WoW power for Giants, the Series 3 WoW power for Swap Force, and the superior Series 4 WoW power for Trap Team onwards. Once again, Chase variants, elites, and even minis can't hold a candle to the awesomeness of Tidal Wave Gilgren. Moving along to the fire element, Sunburn was a really tough decision for me to make. You see, there's one version of him to choose from to begin with, so how could I possibly choose from either Sunburn or Sunburn? It's an impossible task. And it's very unfortunate that Sunburn wound up becoming the only Skylander from Spyro's Adventure not to have any other versions or later re-releases.
Wait a minute!
No chase variants, no reposes, no elites, no minis, nothing. Never mind, I guess this is a really easy decision to make. So by default, this is the one version of Sunburn I choose to keep because I have no other choice in the matter. But now let's look directly to the opposite end of the spectrum where we have Eruptor with just about every single version under the sun to choose from. But when it comes to every single Eruptor in comparison to one another, there really is no comparison in the end, because Lava Lance Eruptor stands out on top as the best version of Eruptor that there is out there. Specifically his Patina version, which looks incredible, and it still possesses the functionality of the original Lava Lance Eruptor, which is what I want out of this figurine in the first place. I'm choosing this version of Eruptor because his gameplay is superior to the original Eruptor in just about every conceivable manner. Unfortunately, the Supercharger revamps aren't backwards compatible, and per the rules I stated at the beginning of this video, this version of Lava Lance Eruptor would remain the same as the original, so this would limit the number of playable fire characters in Spyro's Adventure to 3, but the upgraded gameplay from Eruptor to Lava Lance Eruptor is more than worth it. The improvement, in my opinion, is just that good between these two versions. But now we get to move along to Flame Slinger, where I'd keep his Golden Bronze Series 2 Chase variant, as you get the awesome Chase variant, as well as the Series 2 Wild Power, which makes Flame Slinger even more fast-paced and fun to play as. You literally cannot lose with this version. As for Igniter, I'd go with his legendary Series 2 counterpart, as the gold and black colour palette suit the design so incredibly well. It feels like this is the intended colour palette from the beginning for this character, and there is no reason to choose the original Series 2 over this version. You still get the cooler pose with a great attention to detail on the turtle shellback, and you still get the WoW power, which adds more depth to the risk and reward gameplay style of Series 2 Igniter. What we have here is simply the perfect version of the perfect character. Moving along to tech, with Boomer, I'd keep his elite form, because there is only one thing greater than a seriously overpowered character, and that's a seriously overpowered character with some buffs. This is easily the most overpowered elite, and I'm not going to give up that power trip so easily. But moving along to Drill Sergeant, I'd keep his gold version. For Series 2 WoW Power isn't really anything to write home about, and the pose doesn't significantly improve upon the base character either. At least with Elite Boomer, we get a step up in terms of how awesome the pose looks. So instead of the version of Drill Sergeant I choose to keep is his gold Chase variant, as you can't really go wrong with gold. It makes the figurine look prestigious, which is more than I can say for the gameplay of this character. Next up, there is Drobot, where I choose to keep the Series 2 version, as this poses a significant improvement over the original. I love how every component of his design comes together and interacts with one another to make one crisp and uniformed final design, where the wings are holding up the gear and then the tail slots right into the middle of that very same gear. It's just aesthetically pleasing to see how the figurine uses the space quite perfectly. The Series 2 WoW Power ability isn't amazing, but it's a nice bonus to have because I would have chosen this version regardless due to just how cool the pose looks. Finally, for the tech element, much like I did with Fire, I'd go with a revamped version of Trigger Happy, since his redesign and revamped gameplay are enough to justify it. The original colour scheme for this version is also far superior over the bland and unimaginative Power Blue colour scheme, which doesn't fit the design at all. Instead, the original has colours that are visually pleasing and contrasting in a way that the Power Blue version is lacking significantly. So that is why I would pick the original Double Dare Trigger Happy as the one version of Trigger Happy to keep. Moving along to the undead element, for Hex, I'd choose to keep her Series 2 version because for WoW Power is so incredibly overpowered, I need this in my life. Even if it means sacrificing the really cool Pearl Chase variant version. And then for Cinder, despite how badass and intimidating the shiny metallic version looks, I'd rather have the Phantom version, because we get both WoW Power abilities, since placing Phantom Cinder on the Portal Power for Skylanders Giants reads the figurine as the Series 2. But this pose is also the best that Cinder has to offer, because I love the translucency of the wings. It makes the figurine look really cool, and it's a standout feature because of its uniqueness. So naturally, Phantom Cinder stands out when she's next to other Skylanders, and that's why I choose to keep this one version of her over all of the other versions of Cinder. Chop Chop is yet another character with several awesome versions to choose from, but in the end I went with his Metallic Series 2 version. Despite losing access to the Twin Blade WoW Power, this version still has the Series 2 WoW Power, but what it has that all of the other versions don't is the coolest darn shade of metallic blue known to man. This figurine looks incredible. The yellow eyes really stand out when contrasted with the shiny metallic blue, so now the character is that much more intimidating, The sword embodiments are still invisible on the metallic colour scheme, so the detail is admirable, and it's a figurine that just looks so damn prestigious. I can't in good conscience choose any other version of Chop Chop over this legendary awesomeness that you see before you. But here we are with Ghost Roaster last but not least for the undead element from Spyro's Adventure, where I'd choose to keep his elite form because you get the buffed up attacks from Superchargers onwards, as well as a much cooler pose than the original, which stands out because of the contrast and colour palette. Moving along to the penultimate element for Spyro's Adventure, we have the air element. Starting with Warnado, I'd keep his light core version because I love how the light core effect emanates from his shell. It showcases that this is the source of his power, and it makes you feel a stronger connection to the character when placing him onto the Portal of Power. Plus, just like Zap, the glow in the dark chase variant is pretty ugly, so it's not like we're missing out on much anyways. And as for Lightning Rod, I choose his Metallic Series 2 iteration, as you can still utilise the incredible WoW power ability, but the shade of purple just looks incredibly cool and it's very fitting for Lightning Rod. For Sonic Boom, I choose her Series 2 Glow in the Dark version. This is the best design for the Glow in the Dark figurines in my personal opinion, and I think we need at least one of these more gimmicky chase variants to showcase the appeal behind them. I don't actually own Glow in the Dark Sonic Boom, but I do have her Sparkle version, which will have to stand in for her for the sake of the visuals in this video, but I found this listed on Amazon, so hopefully in the near future I'll get lucky. But the point is, Glow in the Dark Sonic Boom looks awesome. She'll stand out being the only glow in the dark variant because I will have eliminated all the others by the end of this video, and as cherry atop the cake, we still get her incredible in-game WoW power ability to add further to the depth of her gameplay. But as for Whirlwind, on the other hand, I'd choose an in-game variant, that being Series 2 Polar Whirlwind, which still gets the Series 2 WoW power. As for the Series 3 WoW power, I can't even remember what it is or what it does, and that lack of memorability showcases the fundamental problem with a WoW power in the first place. As we're not missing much with the lack of a Series 3 WoW power, I'd rather sacrifice that and get the really nice looking Polar Whirlwind variant, because these colours are really nice when paired together for this design. Much like Legendary Igniter, these colours feel so natural for Whirlwind. But now we move on to the final squad of Spyro's Adventure for 4 life characters, where starting with Zook, I'd keep his stone version because you get the really cool chase variant as well as the WoW power and backwards compatibility. But as for Camo, despite how fitting his red version is, since he looks like the living embodiment of Fruit Punch and that is his catchphrase, but none of that lives up to the awesomeness of Thornhorn Camo's WoW power ability. It's so overpowered and fun to use that no other version of Camo deserves to exist in the first place without this version coming in to add more depth and overpoweredness to the already incredible moveset. But this pose is also incredibly intimidating. Camo really presents himself as a powerful force to be reckoned with when he's standing up on 2 legs. The textures are a welcome addition to a figurine as well because they're sharp and they really sell you on the overpoweredness of this character. But moving along to Stump Smash, without further ado, I'd keep the Snowflock Series 2 version. The texturing for these toys is very well done. I'd love to rub my finger along these toys for the satisfying fluff you'd feel, though I don't think it would be worth taking the chase variant out of a packaging for. On top of that, this version would also make for an incredible Series 2 WoW power, where you can spit a large amount of nuts in succession by holding the secondary attack button. You combine this with the Acorn Path and you get a seriously overpowered Tree Man. So between how cool the variant looks and the elevation in the gameplay when you take into account the WoW power ability, those 2 reasons alone are worth justifying the choice to keep this version of Stump Smash over all his other versions. But the final Spyro's Adventure character to look at is Stealth Elf, and boy is she a massive fan favourite, with many iterations, so I'm left with a difficult choice to pick her ninja variation over everything else, and I actually prefer the original colour scheme, as the dark version only changes her skin and weapon colours. The black suit, which is 90% of the figurine to begin with, remains the exact same, so I'd rather have the original colour contrast with Ninja Stealth Elf, and the reason I'd even choose this version in the first place is because now we gain access to every WoW power this character has to offer, the Series 2 WoW power for Giants, and the Series 3 WoW power for Swap Force, both of which are pretty decent WoW powers that are worth keeping around. But now with Ninja Stealth Elf added to the cast, this is ultimately what the final cast for Spyro's Adventure would look like. I'm still missing Gold Drill Sergeant, Glow in the Dark Sonic Boom, Snowflock Stump Smash, Stone Zook, Metallic Wrecking Ball, and Metallic Lightning Rod, so their regular versions are here instead as stand-ins for the sake of the visuals. I'm not made of money, so I don't own all of the chase variants yet, but that doesn't stop me from choosing those chase variants to keep over the original versions instead. Perhaps if the chase variants were the only versions of these characters, then they wouldn't be so darn hard to find. I also don't think they would be chase variants at all. In an alternate situation such as this, where if they were the only version of their respective characters, I'm sure their colours would appear the exact same in-game as they are on the figurine, but as it stands for this video, we're just going to say every version functions the same as its original, so in the case of chase variants, that's the original colour scheme of character at hand. Now that we're done with Spyro's Adventure, let's move along to Giants, where we'll move through the Giants in a random order, followed by the same for the 8 brand new core Skylanders introduced for this game. Starting with T-Rex, I'd keep his gnarly version, as the blue and the black is a much nicer contrast which really stands out for said colour contrast. In fact, I'd keep all of the variant Giants over the original ones because in every single case they look better and suit the design much better than the original colour palette does. The black and the blue work really nicely for Granite Crusher, the red is incredible for Scarlet and Genie, and the gold and black for Legendary Bouncer just looks natural. As for the rest of the Giants, for Eyebrow, I think the purple metallic chase variant is the version that should stay. The purple metallic colour seems appropriate for armour, and the shade of purple used looks really nice and vibrant, so this version of the character certainly would stand out on the shelf. I'd also choose Sparkle Hothead for similar reasons. After all, red and yellow have become a rather generic colour pattern, so this version of Hothead gives us something different which helps it stand out amongst the rest. For Fun Pack, I'd actually go with his mini Thumpling because he's so darn cute. I can't possibly say no to those eyes. I don't even care if all that he turns into is a miniaturized sidekick that follows you around in Giants and Swap Force. Frankly, that's better than Fun Pack anyway. Plus, for minis play quicker and easier because of the smaller hitboxes. Finally, for Swarm, just like Sunburn, I have no other versions to choose from, so his original version remains by default. But now we have the honour of moving along to the Giant Cores, where we shall be starting with none other than Pop Fizz. Now, the one version of Pop Fizz I choose to keep is simply his Fizzy Frenzy Series 3 figurine from Trap Team, because his beast form is very expressive and colourful, making for the best pose his character has to offer. And with this being a Series 3, you get 2 entire WoW powers to boot, whether that's his Series 2 WoW power in Swap Force, or his Series 3 WoW power from Trap Team onwards. Love Potion Fizzy Frenzy Pop Fizz also has the same functionality, but I prefer the colour scheme of this original figurine. As for Flashwing, she might have a really cool light core which possesses a very nice light up effect, but none of that can possibly hold a candle to the awesomeness of her Jade variant. These colours contrast each other vividly, and they really suit the design, making Flashwing's beauty truly stand out due to the vibrant colour scheme. It's the best version that Flashwing has to offer, hands down. As for Shroom Boom, on the other hand, I'm going to stick with his Sure Shot version because the pose is incredible. This version of Shroom Boom also has an incredible WoW power, which is comedic, fun to use, and efficient in combat. The big three, exactly what you want from a single WoW power ability, which is all you need to justify choosing this version over every other version of Shroom Boom. Next up is Hot Dog. I don't think his Molten version changes up the colours nearly enough, so I'd rather stick with the original colour palette and upgrade to his Series 2 version, where Hot Dog has this cute bone on his mouth, which is also on fire. There is much more expressive and intricate designed elements within this figurine, and it's appropriate to have the bone in his mouth given that Hot Dog is a canine Skylander. This version also comes with an awesome WoW Powers cherry atop the cake. For Chill, I choose her legendary light core version since the gold and black suit her design very well, and getting to see it light up adds to the overall beauty of the figurine. I'm also not crazy about Blizzard Chill's WoW Power. As far as WoW Powers go, it's mid-tier at best. Since we're not missing out on much, it's well worth keeping the superior colour palette combined with the epic light core effect. Fright Rider as a character at first you'd think has no other versions, since he possesses no in-game variants and he never got re-released after Giants. This is where you'd be wrong, however, because Fright Rider got not one, but 2 entire chase variants from which to call his own. Luckily for me, the choice is either a boring glow-in-the-dark single colour chase variant or a sharp and contrasting multicoloured Halloween themed Fright Rider. I think it's needless to say at this point, the choice I made is the glow-in-the-dark version, obviously. All joking aside, for Fright Rider I'd go with the Halloween chase variant over the glow-in-the-dark chase variant, or even its original, because those colours represent the Halloween holiday very, very well, given that Fright Rider looks exactly like a pumpkin being lit up against the dark night sky due to the orange and black colours really contrasting each other. This variant stands out for its unique blend of sharply contrasting colours, and the fact that it represents a real-life holiday is cherry atop the cake for an already exceptional figurine. It's a shame I don't own it, but as for Sprocket, there is not much cooler than, well, a tank, and that's exactly what you find in Heavy Duty Sprocket's repos. Plus you get a wow power which elevates Sprocket from absolute garbage to just a little garbage. But the version I'm going with is yet another chase variant which I actually own this time around, and that's the metallic Heavy Duty Sprocket, which looks incredible due to the metallic paint job actually suiting the figurine quite well. What's even more impressive about the figurine is that, unlike the other metallic characters, it's not just one large bulky colour scheme. The metallic colours are silver and shiny for Sprocket herself, but rustic and greenish for the tank, providing a nice contrast between the two, making the chase variant stand out even amongst all the other metallic chase variants featured in the video already. But I've saved Jetvac for last, where I'm doing much like I did for Eruptor and Trigger Happy, and I'm choosing Jetvac's Supercharger revamp over the original. The saw blades and pushback abilities make Jetvac a little better and much more fun to play. With Legendary Jetvac having the cooler and much more fitting paint job, this wound up becoming the version of Jetvac I choose to keep. Not being able to play Jetvac before Superchargers also isn't much of a loss, given that he literally sucks.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
But moving on from my terrible Jetvac jokes, when you assemble our cast of 16 characters, it certainly looks interesting, shall we say. That's certainly one word for it. But let's take a scroll through all 16 of them, bearing it in mind that regular Hothead, Eyebrawl and Fright Rider are simply filling in for their respective chase variants. But even with the regular giants, it doesn't make this ensemble any less strange. But the strangeness is the point of the video in the first case. We want our limited cast with only one version of each character to stand out, not for all of the characters to blend in with one another, and that's certainly what this cast is able to accomplish. But now it's time to move along to Swap Force, starting with the magic element. There are two enchanted variants I'd like to keep around, as the black and white contrast each other very nicely, and they help make Starstrike and Hootloop alike that much more memorable because the colours are more visually striking and unique than just your generic blue and purple colour combinations. Dunebug does have an interesting chase variant known as Lovebug because his figurine is covered in a reddish pink, but I actually like how the colours of the original Dunebug contrast one another. The colour palette is more fitting for the character's design, and I don't want to lose the strokes the figurine has because they're an incredible attention to detail, so given how I prefer Dunebug just the way he is, for once I'd actually choose the original version over the chase variant version that we got. But as for our final magic character, we're talking about the swapper known as Trap Shadow, where I'm once again choosing to keep his chase variant form. Yes, it's one of the single colour chase variants that lack any sort of contrast, but this has a different colour for each half of the swapper, and it'll all come together very nicely after we've talked about the rest of the Swap Force cast. Moving along to the Earth element, Rebel Rouser has only one version to choose from, so there isn't actually a choice to be made here. I'm kinda stuck with this one you see before you. But as for his Earth swapping companion known as Doomstone, just like Trap Shadow, I'm choosing to keep his chase variant, as for ruby colours in particular look very nice for Doomstone's design. For Slobbertooth, I think his dark variant is really nice looking. For silver and black contrast each other, and for shine for figurine possessors helps it to stand out. The colours are also really fitting with Slobbertooth, as they look really quite nice on him, so I definitely choose Dark Slobbertooth over the original any day of the week. Before talking about Scorp, let's first take a sneak peek at the water element from Skylander Swap Force. When it comes to Riptide, I have a choice between his original or his green chase variant form. Well, the original has a gold suit which contrasts quite nicely with the different shades of blue, so much like Dunebug, I'd rather keep the original version of Riptide over his chase variant. This also means that both the water cores from Swap Force remain the same as their originals, because Punk Shock only ever got one version, so this is the only version of which there is of Punk Shock to choose, so I'd keep the original by default given that I have no other choice in the matter. This leads us back to Scorp, who also has a green variant similar to that of Riptide. Green Gilgren and Green Twin Blade Chop Chop have also been denied a slot on this list due to superior versions of each character existing. But for Scorp on the other hand, I think this green variant works quite nicely. For starters, it's a really nice shade of green which draws the attention to how intimidating the eyes of Scorp are because of the contrast in colours. So due to how awesome this chase variant looks, I choose to keep it as the only version of Scorp, and since there are no other solid green chase variants left, as a result this chase variant stands out even more as the only solid green chase variant. Now that we've covered half of the water element already, let's look at the other two the element have to offer, which are of course the swappers, and there are actually 5 different versions between the two of them. There are the regular versions of each character, the in-game variants of each character, and then there's also Washbuckler's metallic chase variant, though a metallic colour palette doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for a marine creature. As such, I'd rather go with the variant version of Washbuckler, that being his dark iteration, where the colour palette looks really nice on Washbuckler's design, and the contrast in colours really help the figurine to stand out. I could say the same for Freezeblade's variant, where the nitro colours really sell you on his sense of speed and agility. Plus, as we've established already, gold makes everything look that much cooler by default, and this brings us along to the opposite to the water element, that being the fire element, where for Blast Zone, just like his starter pack swapper companion, I'd choose to keep his dark variant form, because it helps him stand out from Igniter even more. Their designs seem so much less similar when one only has the legendary version, and the other only has the dark version. Plus, the dark version looks so darn good on Blast Zone, it's certainly the natural choice it feels like. For Firecracker, I'd also choose his variant. Not his chase, because solid gold seems boring when you have the jade version instead. There are so many colours, all of which balance each other out very nicely for a sharp and mesmerising contrast. Firecracker's design and personality really lean itself towards a much more expressive colour palette, and you find that with the jade variant as opposed to the gold, which is all just far too blocky. And a increased benefit is that the jade version has gold to call its own that helps it stand out additionally, so the fact that we can still have gold but find it on the jade variant version instead is ultimately what makes this the superior version of Firecracker. Then for Frino, I'd easily have to go with his Hogwild variation, as you get the incredibly fun and overpowered Wild Powerful Trap team, as well as the superior pose, because a Rhino on a motorcycle is so freaking cool and that much grander in scale than that of just a regular Rhino. By comparison, well, there is no comparison, hands down, Hogwild Rhino is the superior version of the character here, and it would be pretty insane not to choose this version of the character. Finally, for the fire element, we have Smolder Ash. The original pose certainly is the best pose for this character, as it highlights her whip as a deadly weapon, and she looks like a really intimidating figure. Plus it helps that the fire really wraps around the base and adds to that sheer attention to detail, though unfortunately the figurine is rather fragile, a problem which the light core version does not possess. In fact, the light core version, well, as hinted at by the fact that it's a light core, it's a core which lights up and literally highlights the power emanating from within the fire soul of Smolder Ash. It's an awesome light core, as you can already see before you, but there is one version of the character even grander looking, and that's Snowden Ash, a pun the developers were so proud of that they printed the name of the chase variant on the packaging of the figurine itself. That is a rare honour which is bestowed upon Snowden Ash. Now, I know I've already denied a similar light core on this video the same honour. That's because Golden Snowflocked Light Core Prison Break was the employee holiday exclusive of 2012. Then, just 1 year later, that same holiday employee exclusive became Snowden Ash. It certainly does hurt putting Golden Snowflocked Light Core Prison Break back on the screen, knowing that he can no longer exist due to Hyper Beam Prison Break taking his place. But Smolder Ash, on the other hand, doesn't have any overpowered WoW powers that take priority, therefore her Christmas employee exclusive version can remain as my choice for the only version of Smolder Ash. It's such a shame that all I can provide you with for this video in terms of Snow Dash awesomeness is this photo which you see before you, and no doubt this photo doesn't even do the figurine justice. But due to how absurdly rare this figurine is, and as well as lack of good luck on my behalf, I don't actually own the physical figurine, but even without said figurine in hand, it stands out to me as one of the most detailed and visually striking chase variants out there. The white and the blue contrast each other so vividly, and it shines to truly stand out due to the glitter applied to the white paints. So that, my friends, is why the one version of Smolder Dash I choose to keep is Snow Dash, who works even as well as the original Light Core Smolder Dash, as her head lights up and draws emphasis upon her source of power, and this time the Light Core effect is blue, which means that her fire burns brighter, burns hotter, and that is just so incredibly glorious to look at. But next up we get to move on to the tech element, and right off the bat there are two characters that only have one version to begin with, those being Spyro and Wind Up. So there was a version of Wind Up that the developers used to playtest the game, that being Vicarious Visions Wind Up. This version is really cool, and should it actually have been officially released as a different version of Wind Up, I'd probably be picking it here as the only version of Wind Up to keep. I didn't mention this with Cinder earlier, but she had a Series 4 prototype for Trap Team produced, which was never ultimately released. And just like Vicarious Visions Wind Up, should this version of the character had been released, if it had a good WoW power, I probably would have chosen it over Phantom Cinder. So I do still think Phantom Cinder's pose is slightly better with the translucent wings that just add that much to the figurine, mind you, which is why this Series 4 Cinder would need a good WoW power to be considered over the Phantom version. Phantom Cinder and Wind Up have one other thing in common, that being that both of these toys with their blue bases both originate from Swap Force. But moving along to the other tech core, we have Countdown, who possesses a very unique and interesting variant. Kickoff Countdown celebrates sports as he looks like a football. No other Skylander variants celebrate this sort of thing. Despite the variant looking cool and standing out amongst all the other variants in a unique way, I'd still choose Light Core Countdown to keep because I love how this Light Core adds to the context of his moveset, because when lit up, it looks like the bomb fuse has been lit. You couple that with a red and very expressive face, and what you wind up with is a very cool figurine, worthy of being one version of Countdown that gets to stay. As for Magna Charge, we've already established that gold gives figurines a very prestigious look, so Nitro Magna Charge looks more glorious by default. Plus, the colour scheme really drives home how quick Magna Charge is, making the colour palette very fitting for his design, even more so than the original colour palette. Moving along to Undead, Rattleshake has his awesome quick draw variant, which really stands out due to its sharp and contrasting colour palette, so I'd have to choose this version over the original, even though the colours of the original Rattleshake also work quite well. Both Night Shift and Grim Creeper got legendary versions. For Night Shift, I'd choose to keep the legendary version because the gold and black really suit the design. Having golden boxing gloves is particularly cool to look at, and the black and gold contrast is sharp and visually pleasing as always. The legendary design just feels so natural for Night Shift, and the same could be said for Light Core legendary Grim Creeper. But this time we also have the added benefit of the figurine lighting up, which looks spectacular and draws attention upon the power emanating from within Grim Creeper's body itself. It gives you contextual clues that a ghost lives within Grim Creeper's body. The figurine already looked cool, and the Light Core effect added even further to that. But as for Roller Brawl, she did get a revamped version in Superchargers, which is awesome. In fact, it's the best of all of the revamped Superchargers from that game in my opinion, but the revamped version still can't hold a candle to the awesomeness of the original Roller Brawl. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The original is just that good, which is why I choose to keep the original over any other version of Roller Brawl. Moving along to Life, Gorilla Driller has only one version, so once again I literally don't have any choice in the matter as to which version of character I'd keep. In the case of Zulu, however, his legendary is actually quite ugly, so I'd actually stick with the original version of him, which has more colours, a sharper contrast, and the colours just suit the design a whole lot better. Luckily, Jolly Bumbleblast is a much better variant. The colours are sharp and contrasting, they're a great reflection of Christmas, which is great to see in a Skylander, and most importantly, the colours actually suit the design as well. Finally, for Stink Bomb, I would choose his Chase variant as for one version of Stink Bomb to keep. Now with all three Swapper Chase variants, we can mix and match them to have a complete colour set like that which you see before you. This is why, when choosing to keep one of the Chase variants for the swappers, it's best to just keep them all. It's literally all or nothing. But when it comes to the air element, I've saved this one for last because in Skylander Swap Force, it's the easiest element to determine thus far. 75% of these characters only have one version to choose from, those being Boomjet, Scratch and Popthorn, all of which have no other versions to pick from. Free Ranger was also an easy choice as the legendary colour palette suits his figurine very well. The gold and the black are a far more visually striking colour contrast than what the original colour palette has to offer, plus an awesome in-game character deserves a more prestigious look. So that pretty much does it for Swap Force. Here we have the entire cast ensemble. Once again, I don't own all the Chase variant versions for the characters I chose, so if their regular counterparts are standing in for them instead, it's still a good looking cast if you were to ask me, and this time around, besides the Hog Wild Rhino, they're all blue-based characters, because after Swap Force they didn't really bring back characters who didn't originate from Spyro's Adventure and Giants very often. Rhino and Rollerball were the only ones to appear in future games. But now we finally get to move along to Trap Team, my favourite game of the series, where the structure will be a little more sporadic and random. We'll start by looking at every single core which came from this game that only got a single version. That includes Spotlight, High Five, Trailblazer, Echo, Treadhead, Funny Bone, Rocky Roll, Fist Bump, Batspin, Chopper, Flip Wreck, Torch, Fling Kong, and finally, last but not least, there's Blackout. For those of you keeping count, of the 18 cores introduced in Trap Team, 14 of them only got one version, which is 78% of this entire cast. It's good that Trap Team focused more on introducing a variety of different characters to use rather than being reintroduced to different versions of the same characters over and over again. However, this didn't stop them from still giving 4 cores and Trap Team variant versions, and I'll be choosing the variant as one version of each respective character. This means we'll have King Cobra Kadabra, easily the most unique of the 4 variants, with a white and gold colour scheme that suits the character incredibly well. His fellow Magic Core from Trap Team, known as Deja Vu, also got a variant in the form of Legendary Deja Vu. The black and gold really suit the design, and it looks much cooler than the original version, giving me no reason to really choose the original version over this version of the character. As for Blades, I'd also go with his legendary version. The gold and black has always looked good for armoured Skylanders, and Blades is no exception, so much like Deja Vu, I have no reason to pick the original version over the awesome looking legendary variant. But finally there is Dark Food Fight, whom I've chosen over the original because the black and silver offer up a far more interesting colour contrast than what the original has, since the original only possesses different shades of green, and as a result it does in fact look pretty boring when compared to the dark variant. Now we'll move along to the Trap Masters, starting with the ones which only got one version, and that includes Nightlight, Enigma, Blastermind, Kaboom, Nightmare, Wallop, Gearshift and Gusto. That's 8 Trap Masters with only one version as opposed to 14 for the cores, meaning that with 8 out of 18 Trap Masters each only possessing one version, that means 44% of this entire cast are limited to just one version each. Let's begin with Earth, where I choose to keep Nitro Headrush, since I think the gold and white colour palette suits her well, and it makes her look pretty quick, which she is whenever you're charging into battle. As for Nitro Crypt King on the other hand, he's slow, so the gold and white checkered colour palette doesn't really suit his design very well. I actually prefer the black and gold contrast the original figurine possesses, so I'd certainly choose to keep the original version instead. As for Lobstar, I'd choose to keep his Winterfest version, since the original has a lot of the same colour, and as such it can look pretty brand, so the contrast and colours are a visually pleasing treat for the design, plus it's a well thought through and creative character design where there are candies all over the figurine, which are a common gift at Christmas time. I don't care that this figurine won't even stand out as it isn't unique, given that we have Jolly Bumbleblast also being a Chase variant. Hell, we even have Snowdash as a Christmas variant from the exact same game, but the truth of the matter is that this is the superior version of Lobstar in my eyes, so it is naturally the version I choose to keep. For Jawbreaker, I'd obviously go with his legendary version because the black stands out much more than his original colours, and it's a very fitting colour palette for Jawbreaker's design since he's made of metal and black is a common paint used for metal surfaces. I'd also keep Bushwhack's legendary version as the colours are sharp and contrasting, making this version of the character much more appealing than the original, plus his luscious hair looks glorious in gold, and I'm not sure I'm quite ready to get rid of Goldilocks just yet. This actually makes life the only element in Skylander Trap Team to have an in-game variant for both a core and a Trapmaster, since Magic has no in-game Trapmaster variants and Air also has no in-game Trapmaster variants. Those are also the only elements with in-game core variants. Hell, the game didn't even have any core chase variants, it only had a single trio of chase variants, and they're the versions of each respective Trapmaster I'd personally choose to keep. Crystal Tough Luck looks incredible with the translucent crystal colour scheme. The contrasting with the green blades and yellow eyes makes her figurine stand out that much more, and it adds to her intimidation factor. Plus, the detail is still maintained for this figurine, with things like encarvings on her chest still being visible. The Crystal Thunderbolt is my favourite though, because the translucent crystal colours look so good when applied to this design. It feels fitting for the character as well. The same could be said for Shortcut, as the crystalline nature of the figurine draws attention to just how fragile Shortcut seems to be. You can still see the cuts and scars caused by his massive scissors that Shortcut runs around with, and I just love the final result the figurine presents itself with.
For Wildfire, we gotta choose Dark Wildfire. I mean, who wouldn't? Man, if this was the only one that was available, I wouldn't have so many problems trying to get it the first time, you know? If you don't know, it took me 3 years to find this figure. 3. I went to my local GameStop. They had used Skylanders there. This boy was in a little paper bag there. I said, oh, no, I'm good. I don't need them. And then when I was at work that day, I goes, huh, I kind of want him. And then the next day I go back and he's not there. Regular Wildfire was, but not Dirt. But then 3 years later, I saw a person on Facebook Marketplace selling Skylanders. And this was one of them. And I messaged him saying, hey, can I buy this one? And she was like, yeah, why not? So I went and bought him. So if this was the only one, I wouldn't have had to worry. I wouldn't have to wait 3 years and randomly see a person on Facebook selling it. But nah. This is our variant, I guess. I said, what we'll do is here we are. I'm here. Why am I here? This isn't even my video. What am I here for? I'm just trying to eat. And I just literally had to interrupt for that. So, this isn't even my video.
I would personally choose to keep Dark Wildfire since the black and silver colour contrast works much better than just the entire figurine being decked out in gold like it is in the original. It's basically the same situation as Food Fight we talked about earlier, because I prefer having that black and silver colour contrast over no sort of colour contrast whatsoever. That brings us to our final character, Dark Snapshot. The black and silver once again look awesome on this figurine, and the sharp colour contrast helps this variant stand out amongst the rest. This keeps the entirety of the original Dark Starter Pack intact, and as always, they look fantastic amongst one another. Before moving along to the entire cast ensemble, I'd like to first take a look back at Chopper. There was a leak which circulated in early 2015 before Superchargers was announced about a Series 2 Chopper with a purple base of all things. I kinda wish this leak was real because I would have loved to have seen a different version of Chopper. I'm sure that if this was a real version of Chopper, I'd be picking it as the one version of Chopper to keep, but alas, there is only one actual version of Chopper to choose from, so we're stuck with this version of the character you currently see before you. This character is awesome though, so I'm alright with that. And as for the complete Trap Team ensemble, every figurine you see before you is actually the same as the version of each respective figurine I choose to keep, because this time around, I actually own them all. It's a miracle, so there aren't any stand-ins. The arrangement of all the figurines is also just as random and sporadic as the structure of this portion of the video has been, but it's nice to change up the formula here and there. This cast once again looks interesting, but together if they contrast and highlight each other's differences, it's certainly a strong cast indeed, and it puts emphasis upon why Skylander's Trap Team is the best Skylanders game, hands down. That is fact, do not fight it. But now we're going to move along to Superchargers, where we get to return to a much more stable structure. For Magic, I'd actually keep Splat and her respective vehicle for Splatter Splasher as the original versions. This is due to the entire idea of Splat being paint based, making it important for her to be colourful, something which her Power Blue version takes away and replaces with a bland blue and white colour combination instead. As for the Soda Skimmer on the other hand, I'd choose the Nitro version, as the gold and white checkered colour palette looks good and fitting for this vehicle. Plus it's a racing game. To have a checkered design is incredibly fitting for the game's theme, as a checkered line represents the end of a race. For Earth, I'd obviously choose Steel Plated Smash Hit. The shade of green is so incredible, and you combine that with the silver contrast for something truly prestigious.
What?
Oh, who am I kidding? This is the ugliest possible variant they could have made for this game. Let's get him in the trash where he belongs. The actual combination I'd go with is the original, as there are no other versions of the Thump Truck to go for, and the original Smash Hit looks miles better than the ugly steel-plated version. But when it comes down to the Shark Tank, there is only one version from which to choose from, so I have no choice in the matter here, as I'm stuck with this being the one version of the Shark Tank to keep. Moving along to water, neither Diveclops really stands out, as the figurine is quite blocky with its use of colour and it has no contrast to it whatsoever. Based on how many Christmas variants I've chosen already, I'd rather just keep the original Diveclops. The same could be said for the Dive Bomber, where the original works much better and pairs much better with the original Diveclops anyway. The Reef Ripper once again only has one version, so I once again have no choice in the matter. As for Dark, I'd choose Dark Spitfire, as this version of the character looks awesome. Black Fire pairs very well with Silver Metal, and as for his vehicle, I'd choose the E3 Hot Streak, because I love how the front of the vehicle is gold, whilst the rest is red, and the vehicle transitions from the two colours very smoothly in an extremely eye-pleasing manner. These two units still look like they can belong together as a supercharger combination as well, but as for the burn cycle, I'd go with the patina version because it looks awesome and spares us from yet another generic red and yellow colour combination. As for tech, I choose both the Patina High Volt and Patina Shield Shredder, as this supercharger combination is very aesthetically pleasing and ensures that both these figurines look like they belong with one another. It's a great way to help these characters stand out due to the uniqueness found behind these chase variant colours. And then as for the Gold Rusher, much like I have done already with Splat and the Splatter Splasher, we're going to stay far away from the Power Blue variant and stick with the original Gold Rusher instead. As for Undead, I'd go with Frightful Fiesta, not only because his design is an excellent reflection of Halloween, something we haven't yet seen in an in-game Skylander variant, but the design also reflects Mexican culture as well, since the figurine itself looks like something plucked straight out of the Dias de los Muertos holiday that takes place in Mexico. This is due to the mariachi uniform and the orange colour palette, just like the orange leaf petals that are left to guide family ancestors to their family or friends during the Dias de los Muertos celebration. As for the Tomb Buggy, I choose the original over the Chase variant, as the Chase variant version is quite ugly and it doesn't suit the vehicle's design whatsoever. As for the life element, I'd stick with the original Thrillipede and Buzzwing, since the Buzzwing only has the one version to choose from in the first place, and Thrillipede's variant, despite its name, isn't a very exciting one. The colours blend together unlike the original, where they contrast each other nicely and leave an impact. As for Stealth Stinger, much like the Soda Skimmer, I choose to keep the Nitro version, as it looks good on the Stealth Stinger and it's an appropriate theme for the game at hand. Plus, these two variants look incredible when put next to one another. As for the air element, I'd have to go with Snowbright Stormblade, as her colour palette is just incredible. She looks just like a Christmas tree due to the green and gold colour contrast, which is gorgeous for the eyes. And the blades being Christmas lights is a stroke of pure genius. It's such a memorable figurine, it's creative and it looks great coming from all angles. As for her vehicle, there is only one version of the Sky Slicer, so as a result I'm going to have to stick with that, and the same could be said for the Jetstream. Superchargers continue to incorporate the light and dark elements after their introduction in Trap Team, and this time around the light and dark characters got a few different versions to choose from for this video. Unless your name is Nightfall, then there is still just one, but at least with her vehicle we can choose the dark version, as it seems only appropriate to have a dark version of a dark Skylander, even if it is just for a vehicle. Plus for Black and Silver, once again looks awesome for the Sea Shadow, as for colour palette complements the design very well. As for Astroblast and the Sunrunner, I'd once again go with their legendary versions, since the Black and Gold is a much more visually pleasing colour palette than the bland white based colour scheme of the originals. The shades of white can barely be distinguished from one another. As a result, the original versions look really pale in comparison to the legendary ones. But don't you worry about the Nintendo guest stars, I didn't forget about them either. I choose the dark versions for every single figure, since the black and silver colour palettes look amazing for each of these designs, and it helps give all four of them a very uniformed and appealing aesthetic. With this unique contrast of colours for these iconic characters, a colour palette which we've never seen done before on these specific characters, it makes these figurines stand out not only amongst Skylanders, but amongst their fellow amiibo as well. And that brings us to the Superchargers cast ensemble. We're lucky I'm able to fit everything onto a single desk, but it still looks incredible when brought together in this manner. I've put High Volt, Shield, Shredder and the Burn Cycle off to one side, as these regular versions are stand-ins for the patina versions I don't own yet. And that finally brings us along to Imaginators, where the background for each shot will change because I've changed location. This is due to all my senseis being at my University of Lincoln accommodation, whilst all my other Skylanders were at home in Loughborough. So naturally I filmed everything to do with all my other Skylanders first at Loughborough, and now we get to experience everything else involved around the senseis at my University of Lincoln accommodation. One other thing to note is that I totally forgot about the Crypt Crusher when making the Superchargers portion of this video, but naturally I don't have much of a choice when it comes to which version of the Crypt Crusher I choose to keep in the first place, because there is only one version. This does unfortunately mean the Crypt Crusher was absent in the ensemble shot of the entire Superchargers cast, so you'll just have to use your imagination to pretend it was there the whole time. All that aside, let's finally move on to Imaginators and look at which version of each sensei I choose to keep. For Magic, Buckshot was meant to get a second version. In fact, his second version is still found within the game's files, but the variant we're talking about never actually got an official release, since we're talking about Heartbreaker Buckshot, which was obviously scrapped due to the devilish look of the variant. That's what leads me to being quite glad that this version of the figurine never got released, because even if it did, I guarantee with a demonic look like that, I would have chosen the original version over it anyways. In fact, speaking of original versions, that's also the version of Pinata I choose to keep. Yes, the Rock Candy version looks incredible, but this original sensei has so much detail and the contrast and colours are so visually dazzling that I couldn't in good conscience choose the Chase variant version over the original. I wouldn't give up this bombardment of colours and attention to detail so easily. As for the final Magic sensei, it's Mr. Cat, and he's easy since there's no choice to even make here. Mr. Cat only received one version in the first place. Moving along to Earth, despite how the legendaries in the game changed up from the original colour scheme, I'd still choose Legendary Tri-Tip's version over the original because the red and gold contrast is so glorious and it's pretty unique. It also helps that this is a more visually striking and memorable colour palette than what the original has to offer, so I definitely choose the legendary version of Tri-Tip to keep. As for Barbella, despite not owning it, I'd have to go with the crystal version. This colour palette distracts from the fact that Barbella's design is nothing more than just another generic rock golem that we've seen done time and time again throughout the Skylanders franchise. Perhaps people would give her a better chance if her colour palette was this much more unique and memorable, and Barbella deserves it since her gameplay is top tier without a doubt. As for Golden Queen, I'd have to go with the dark version, as for Black and Silver work really well for her design and help her to stand out. Moving along to Water, just like Dark Golden Queen, I'd also keep Dark Kingpin, as these colours really suit Kingpin and they're more visually striking, so that now we're guaranteed to remember Kingpin's excellent design, even if a penguin with massive off gauntlets is pretty memorable to begin with. As for both Tidepool and Graveclubber alike, they each only received one version, so we'll have to stick with the originals as there is literally no other choice in the matter. This brings us along to the fire element, where every single sensei has at least one other version to choose from. Starting with Flarewolf, I'd have to go with his hardboard version, as there are no Easter variants in our cast at the moment, and these colours are more visually striking and distinctive than the colours of the original Flarewolf, helping him to stand out even more. For Ember, I choose her Chase variant, because Any version of a character whose name is a pun is instantly worth keeping around for that one factor alone. It also helps that Master December looks incredibly cool, and she has a unique honour the same as Snowbright Stormblade, where despite being a chase variant, they still changed up the packaging design to reflect the figurine to give this chase an extra special feeling behind it. At this point, I don't even care that we've had an oversaturation of Christmas Skylanders. I'd rather just choose which version of Ember is the best, and in this case that's her chase variant form. Finally, for the fire element, there is Taikon Quo, where I choose to keep his mystic version, as these colours suit the design very well, and they're very contrasting and pleasing to the eye to help Taikon Quo stand out even more amongst all the other Skylanders. The tech element might have 4 different characters within it, but there are actually only 5 different versions amongst all of them, making this a less filled up element than either Earth or Fire. Robo, Dr. Crankcase, and Dr. Neocortex each only got 1 version respectively, and that brings us on to Chain Reaction, who does have an all-orange chase variant form, but I wouldn't dare choose that over the original. The complete orange figurine takes away from the detail of this design. The contrast in colours make these chains that make up Chain Reaction look and feel more rustic, giving Chain Reaction much more personality. So in the end, I'd actually choose the original version of every single tech sensei. As for Undead, we once again have 6 different versions across 3 different characters, and I'd choose the variant version every single time, same as I would for the fire element. Candy Coated Chopscotch has a much better and more fitting colour palette based on her design, making her stand out that much more. Now her head looks just like a pumpkin, a trick they missed with Pumpkin Eyebrow's head, as it didn't show up in-game as an actual pumpkin. This figurine's head even has engravings within it, just like an actual pumpkin. As for Pit Boss, just like Tri-Tip, the new legendary red and gold colours suit his design very well, and they contrast in a unique manner to help Pit Boss really stand out. Now Pit Boss and Tri-Tip look spectacular together. Wolfgang's Dark iteration is also much more cooler looking than his original, even if Silver Fur does seem a little strange at first, but you get used to it. For the air element, I choose Egg Bomber Airstrike, as his Easter variant pairs nicely with the hard-boiled Flare Wolf, and the colours are much nicer for this variant. There is a sharper colour contrast. It's a great reflection of the Easter holiday with these softer colours, and overall I just find that these colours suit the design just as much, if not even more so, than what the original colours do for the original design. As for Bad Juju, she fit right alongside Taikon Quo with her mystical variant. As for red and black have a sharp colour contrast, it also helps that the colour palette suits this design even more so than it did for Taikon Quo. Plus I just love how those daggers look in red. But finally, for Wildstorm, he only has 1 version, so this is the only version of him to choose from. It's a shame. With more than 1 version, I'm sure he'd be slightly easier to get your hands on, but that just isn't the case, unfortunately. But speaking of absurdly rare characters, let's take a look at Chompy Mage, where I choose to keep his original form, as the green looks much better on this character and better reflects his Chompy based moveset, as the green coloured Chompies are the most iconic and recognisable enemy within the entire history of the Skylanders franchise. I don't think the red suit is really fitting for Chompy Mage's design. There isn't really a sharp colour contrast to this chase variant form either, and we've had plenty of Christmas variants already in this video, so there is no need to add even further to that pile. As for the rest of the life element, these 3 senseis only had 1 version each, so I don't have any choice in the matter. I'll have to stick with all these original versions, which means that every single life sensei I have chosen the original version to keep. Finally, we get to look at the light and dark elements. Blastatron only has the 1 version, so there isn't much choice for him, but with Aurora on the other hand, I'd certainly choose her Solar Flare iteration, because the detail on her paint job is just that impressive. It implies just how quick Aurora truly is, and the orange and black contrast is so much more interesting and memorable than what the original colour scheme has to offer. Now I have a Skylander that really fits with the channel aesthetically, given that there is literal fire found all over her. But moving along to the dark element, Hutzicle is yet another character where I choose to keep the original over the in-game variant version, since they took an already ugly colour scheme with steel plated Smash It, and somehow made it even worse with Hutzicle. This monstrosity isn't a Skylander, it's some sort of nightmare fuel a developer vomited one night. But getting that awful image out of our minds, let's take a look at Starcast, who has 2 chase variants to call his own, something very unique for a sensei. Why they gave very special treatment to such an average character is beyond me, but here we are. I'm showcasing one of these chase variants before you, but that's simply just a flex, as this isn't the version of Starcast I'm choosing to keep. Instead, I'd go with his birthday Ben form, as this bombardment of colours is incredibly unique and memorable. The photos I'm showing before you do not do this chase variant justice. Plus, Starcast gets to maintain his absurd level of detail, as his chest still has all of the stars found within the night sky to make up his body, and it makes it look as though his body is made up of an entire galaxy, a theme very appropriate for the dark element of which Starcast is a part of. And that brings us along to our very final character, whom once again only has one figurine, so I don't have any choice in the matter. This is the version I'd keep, as it's literally the only version to exist for the Skylander in the first place. But just like that, we've made it to the final shot of the video. I want to thank everyone who stuck with me through this entire marathon of a video. Whilst it was a ton of fun to make, it did take a while to produce, so you can show your appreciation for the effort by smashing that like button below and indicating to me that you'd like to see more content just like this in the future. Focusing solely on the senseis now, this cast looks incredible together, even if the tech and life elements are completely unchanged. The only stand-ins this time for the chase variants that I do not own is regular Barbella and regular Starcast in place of their respective chase variants. Since all these characters have so much detail and colour behind them already, I didn't find much need to change them. So in cases like Pinata and Chain Reaction, I didn't even choose their chase variant forms in the end. Now if that having been said and done, the premiere is almost coming to an end, so it's time to roll that outro without further ado. I cannot in good conscience end of this video without first thanking all of my incredible channel members whose continued support help make these videos possible. Without them, these videos would be near impossible to make, so from the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate every last one of them. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, there are plenty of options on screen now to explore, and please consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. On that note, this video is coming to an end, so thank you so much as always for watching. Until the next video arises, peace!